Day 93 of the Atlantic hurricane season, day 111 in the eastern Pacific, and that's where we have a storm at this time. Tropical storm Kiko, which has formed in the past few hours, rapidly intensifying into a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm. We currently have many invests out there as well, I think 6 in total, throughout the Atlantic and in the South Indian Ocean as well as the West Pacific too, and the remnants of Kongray, which are moving out to sea beyond Japan now, not likely to threaten any other land areas, obviously, as it moves out towards the northern Pacific. This is the Pacific Ocean. The wide-shot satellite imagery, then you can see all 3 invests in the western Pacific there. 96W, which is the most likely to form, 93W and 94W not likely to form over the next few days. 96W is the one we'll be watching out for because the models do develop that one over the next few days. Kiko is expected to move towards Mexico but not go anywhere or make any landfall anywhere, that is. The Atlantic Ocean, things looking, well, I would say fairly quiet, but it isn't really, is it? 2 invests out there, but none of them are likely to develop over the next few days, so it is quiet in that sense. 96L, which has just been downgraded from medium chance to low chance in the next 48 hours to 20%. Just now at the midnight UTC update on September the 1st, and 92S as well, which is located in the South Indian Ocean. A little bit of a disturbance down there early on in the season, or the season hasn't even started yet down there, but rumblings and things, signs of things to come down there. Sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific, you can see very warm waters were not too far from where Kiko is, certainly warm enough for development, at least for the short term, but waters will cool off rather quickly as the storm passes over that area. The rest of the waters there near the Mexican coast fairly warm. The Atlantic, the western half of the Gulf of Mexico remains the hottest point, around 29 to 30 degrees Celsius here. The rest of the Atlantic generally around 28 degrees, especially nearer to land areas, but you can see that big swathe out towards the mid-Atlantic region as well. Lots of warm waters here for any storms that we curve out to sea, but certainly good conditions towards the equatorial waters. And in the western Pacific, you can see the bulk of the warm water out at sea there, near the Mariana Islands, as a matter of fact. That's where the warmest point is, around 30 degrees generally, but throughout the whole of the western Pacific, waters remaining very warm, certainly enough for tropical cyclone development. Just a little bit of a cool patch near Taiwan, where that current invest is in the Pacific. So here's the new storm then, Tropical Storm Kiko, up to 60 miles per hour already, a pressure of 1000 millibars. And it could even intensify a little bit more as time goes on, as it moves towards the north fairly slowly. Position is currently 19.3 degrees north, 116.2 degrees east, and is expected to head north fairly slowly as a tropical storm, maybe even have a shot of hurricane status, but weakening will commence very soon, probably in the next 12 to 24 hours, and then eventually it will weaken into maybe a tropical depression or straight to a remnant low in about 4 or 5 days time, maybe even less than that depending on how things go, but certainly no threat to land over the next few days. So let's take a look at Invest 97L in the Atlantic, probably the most interesting of the 2 invests at the moment, at least in terms of any land effects. Wind's currently 30 miles per hour, pressure 1008 millibars, positions 15.1 degrees north, 55.5 degrees west, and is expected to move towards the west initially as a tropical wave as it is for now. Could be a little bit of a development over the next few days, but 10% chance doesn't really mean that that's likely, but we are expecting it to curve towards the north at least at some point. The current models is currently trending towards maybe a landfall on Hispaniola Island or maybe in Cuba, but whether that's as a tropical system or not, a tropical cyclone, remains unknown, but unlikely at this stage. Let's take a look at the latest shear map then for the Atlantic. First of all, you can see some high shear levels near the Lesser Antilles, which will certainly cause some problems for that invest, 97L, as it moves through those islands, as it moves towards the west, so not too much chance of development, at least whilst that shear is there. As for 96L near the Cape Verde Islands, lower shear amounts there, so there could be a little bit of development over the next few days. At least looking at the shear maps anyway. We're going to the water vapour very soon, and this is the eastern Pacific as well, including the central Pacific too. You can see that tropical storm symbol representing Kiko, low shear environment around that storm, and possibly decreasing even more as well around its general vicinity, so that means certainly good conditions for a little bit more strengthening before weakening. I'm assuming that may be due to some dry air. We'll go on to that very shortly. Looking at the western Pacific, you can see very low shear levels almost throughout the across the board in the open Pacific, near the tropical regions. Out in the South China Sea, more shear around here to the south of Taiwan, to the north of the Philippines, and into Vietnam as well. So 96W will have a little bit of trouble developing, at least under those conditions at the moment. High shear amounts where that storm is. So here's the Atlantic, the water vapour picture. You can see some dry air to the Invest Southwest 97L. so that may cause a little bit of problems as it moves towards the west, including that shear as well. Coupled with that will cause some at least very limited development, if any, but more moist conditions towards the northwest of that, out in the open Atlantic in between the United States and Bermuda. Looking at the eastern Pacific here, you can see that big swathe of dry air out there in the open Pacific, but near where Kiko is, not too much in terms of dry air penetrating into that system, so it's still good to go, at least for a short while, until water temperatures, sea surface temperatures drop off as it heads towards the north and it begins to weaken. Looking at the western Pacific, you can see a little bit of a mix here. Some dry air conditions out in the open Pacific, extending maybe a little bit towards the Mariana Islands as well. But some moist conditions as well, especially towards Taiwan, where those current invests are as well in the northern half of the western Pacific region. So certainly moist conditions for those invests, but obviously shear levels aren't very conducive in that region. So this is the Western Pacific overview at the moment. You can see all three invests quite clearly towards the very north of that picture. The first one near Taiwan, that's 96W. 93 and 94 currently located out to sea. Apologies if I get the numbers wrong, by the way, there are too many out there, aren't there? But you can barely see them on that satellite imagery, not too much in terms of heavy rainfall associated with those systems. Here's Invest 96L, currently located in the Atlantic, just moved off the African coast in the past day or two, heading towards the Cape Verde Islands as a disturbance at the moment. You can see it's struggling to get itself together over the past few hours. This is the floater imagery. You can see how it's not been able to wrap its intense rainfall around the centre of the storm, so that's certainly not a good sign for its future. But this is Tropical Storm Kiko. You can see how it's developed over the past few hours. A big burst of intensity there that's near the start of that frame, trying to build again in those last few frames too. So certainly interesting to watch how that one will go. But I should imagine it will be very short-term strengthening before the weakening begins. So here's the CMC model then, always aggressive, and you can see four systems forming in the Atlantic on this one towards the end there. The first one's 96L, grazing the Venezuelan coast first of all, and then moving between Jamaica and Haiti as a tropical storm before moving into Cuba, as well as two systems in the eastern Pacific too. The ECMWF is fairly quiet, apart from that storm forming in the eastern Pacific, another one towards the end of that run there. The eastern Pacific's fairly active this year so far, but as far as the Atlantic's concerned, fairly quiet according to the ECMWF model. The GFS has Kiko moving towards the north and then drifting towards the southeast by the looks of things, and then another storm forming in the eastern Pacific as well in about 3 or 4 days time, so certainly more development expected there in the eastern Pacific, but not much in the Atlantic once more according to the GFS either. The NavGem model doesn't really predict much, but does predict perhaps a little bit of a system forming in the Gulf of Mexico towards the end of that run near the Yucatan Peninsula and then moving into Mexico. You see that little closed line there towards that end of that loop. The GFDR model, now with this one it was probably before the storm actually developed, so we're not really looking at Kiko. We want to look for any further systems that may develop, but GFDL isn't too keen on that idea. The HWRF is maybe fairly similar. I've not seen this one yet. A new system forming near the Mexican coast towards the end of that run there, possibly becoming a tropical storm. We'll see about that one over the next few days. So let's take a look at the intensity models for 97. Now you can see the DSHP and the LGEM models both predicting it to become a Category 1 hurricane, at least somewhere along its route. I'm not too sold with that idea. It will probably become a tropical storm at the most, especially with only one of the models that I've shown earlier being on board with this idea. So I think a tropical storm is probably the most ambitious this storm could hope for, but you never know what may happen. You can never let your guard down here in the tropics. It could be a hurricane, you never know. But this is the shear comparisons. You can see here fairly low predicting shear, so it must be decreasing over the next few days to near zero according to this model. And then the sea surface temperatures, as always, fairly warm at this time of year, especially in that region, 29 to 30 degrees possibly over the next few days as it moves into the Caribbean. Certainly no cause for concern with sea surface temperatures in terms of the storm's development. And the humidity is around 50%, moderate at the moment, but rising slightly to around 60% over the next few days. So that will certainly be interesting to watch as well. So we'll see how 97L goes, but at the moment, low chance of development. The CMC model for the Western Pacific, then you can see it develops 96W into a typhoon, quite a significant storm, and then eventually moving into Japan after stalling not too far from Okinawa and the Amami Islands in Japan as well. Another system forming a very small system towards its east as well. The GFS model also is on board with a storm forming out of 96W, moving towards the southern coast of Japan, brushing Kyushu by the looks of it, and then brushing the southern coast of Japan. Before dissipating or turning extratropical, and another system forming in its wake as well, but probably not tropical storm strength. So let's take a look at the overall predicted season scores then for September the 1st, 2013, coming towards the business end of these predictions. TS Debbie's in first place with 56 points, CES 15 Hurricanes in second with 49, and William in third place with 47. Now you can submit your own storm totals at the website force13.com/interactive.html, but if you stand any chance of winning, I do it right now because the scores are going down as we speak, as the accuracy goes down as we get towards the end of the year. So far 207 entrants to date, and the average user score is 19.7, up at 0.2, so something's going right for some people at least. So what happened on this day then on September the 1st? In 1966, Tropical Storm Greta formed in the Atlantic. In 1973, Tropical Storm Delia formed near the Yucatan Peninsula. There it is pictured a little bit later on. In 1976, Hurricane Ida dissipated in the Eastern Pacific. There is a bit earlier on when it reached its peak as a Category 3 storm, and in 1979 David made its landfall in Cuba as a Category 1 hurricane on this day on September the 1st. Also that year, Tropical Storm Elena made landfall in Texas, resulting in 5 fatalities and nearly $10 million in damages. Tropical Storm George formed in the Atlantic in 1980, there it is pictured there, and in 1990 Hurricane Lowell dissipated in the Eastern Pacific, and in 1995 Humberto turned post-tropical in the Atlantic, there it is earlier on when it looked a little bit better than it would have done as it turned post-tropical on this day, September the 1st. Also, 2000, Tropical Storm Maria made landfall in China. In 2002, Rusa made landfall in South Korea as a Category 1 typhoon, resulting in 233 fatalities pictured there near Japan. In 2002, also, Hernan peaked as a Category 5 hurricane, there it is pictured at its peak intensity, a Category 5 storm. And in 2006, John made landfall on the Baja California Peninsula, resulting in 5 fatalities and $61 million in damages. In 2006, Tropical Storm Ernesto made landfall in North Carolina, resulting in 5 fatalities and $500 million in damages. In 2008, Gustav made landfall in Louisiana as a Category 2 storm, resulting in 53 fatalities and $4.2 billion in damages. Hannah also peaked as a Category 1, looping around the Turks and Caicos Islands near Haiti as well, resulting in 530 fatalities and $160 million in damages. And Kevin dissipated in the Eastern Pacific in 2009. And don't forget, you can track any storm that forms at the website, including ones that are currently active. force13.com/stormtracking.html, that's the main page for the storm tracking information. There you're presented with the overview map showing all the storms that are currently active, including post-tropical storms and idvests, with tables at the top and bottom which show their intensities and indeed any warnings that are currently in effect. No warnings at the moment in terms of Kiko, and I don't expect that there ever will be. It'll probably be a fairly short-lived storm. As for Kongwei, what's left of it in the Western Pacific, there are still some gale warnings going on in Hokkaido in Japan, but those will likely be discontinued in the next few hours. But elsewhere in the world, no warnings at all for any tropical systems at this time. You can also visit the social pages, YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Force 13's on all 3 of those. Just search us on any of those and you should find us fairly easily enough. And please do show your support by doing the usual means of engagement, liking, subscribing, commenting, favoriting, or anything else that I may have forgot to say. I was going to say subscribe, but I think I already said that. But if not, please do subscribe, because that would be very nice indeed. And if you have any comments, then please do so at the bottom of this video in the comment section. Or if you want to send a private message, please, I'm very much open to that as well. Please do so. But that's if you want to get in touch. 85 days until Hurricane Week 2013. This is our big feature that we run every year. The second time we're doing this. Visit the website for more information, force13.com/HW2013.html. That includes the schedule as well, if you're interested in see how it's going to go on at the end of November. You can also visit the discussion forum, force13.com/forum. Just click the link at the top where you can discuss current storms that are going on at the moment. But yes, until then, that is all for now. The next bulletin, well, there isn't going to be another bulletin in future because they're being discontinued now. But don't panic, they're going to be replaced by standard updates for individual storms whenever they are active. So not only is it a bit more efficient. I got the word out in the end, but it's also less workload for me because I do have a personal life as well, so it takes a little bit of work off myself the way we're going to be doing it in future. But don't worry, we won't be missing out on any tropical weather updates in particular, so please do stay tuned. The next update will probably be a tropical storm update on Kiko. That will be sometime tomorrow, September the 1st, during the day probably, UTC. But until then, that's all for now.